Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, I'm Serena Halstead.
Hello, I'm Mellisa Smith. Welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So we've been looking at this series on rubrics, and so far what we did is the last time we spoke to Dr. Susan Brookhart, who's an expert in the field of grading and formative assessment, and she shared with us some of her knowledge on rubrics from her years as an elementary and middle school teacher. And so today what we want to do is to tap into another type of expertise, hearing from classroom teachers who actually use and create rubrics. So with us today, we have two of our teachers from Wake County Public Schools. We have Mary Newton and Erin McDermott. Welcome, ladies.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
So Erin and Mary, do you want to share with us a little bit about yourselves in terms of education? Mary, start with you.
I've been a high school ELA teacher for 22 years now, and I've been here at Fuquay since 2015 and been in other various districts in North Carolina before that.
Thank you. Erin, what about you?
This is my 12th year education expertise, and I've been at Reedy Creek Magnet Middle School for 7 years now. I teach 6th grade ELA, and I'm also our school's instructional facilitator.
Do you get two sets of checks? I know we wear many hats, but still one single check. All right, so let's get started. So as teachers, we have access to a lot of rubrics. And so there's the single point rubric, there's an analytic rubric, and a holistic rubric. Do you have a favorite style of rubric?
I have to say it depends on the task. If it's something that I just want to measure, can students do it or not, then I'm going to use a single point with that criteria down the middle where I can literally check off and then have the kids go back and correct what did they not meet on that negative side. But then for a larger assignment like a project or an essay, the analytical or eventually later in the course, a holistic rubric is what I really like to use to measure their growth.
I'm a very big fan of the analytic rubric. I like the amount of data that it generates for the students and the very precise and specific definitions of what the work should look like at each level.
Yeah, Mary, you said later on you like the holistic. Why is that? I'm curious.
So I like to start them almost in that progression with, do I have it or do I not, with a single point, and then build them up to the analytic where it gives them specific criteria that we then look at their proficiency level. So like writing a topic sentence. Are they able to master it with that advanced, or are they at a proficient? And same with text evidence, where we in that progression for proficiency. And then toward the end, especially with like an essay, a body paragraph, do we have everything that needs to be in it together? So looking at that holistic work that they've produced.
When we were talking to Sue Brookhart, one of the things that she kept emphasizing is that a rubric is supposed to help a teacher collect evidence of learning. So how do you ensure that the rubric that you create relates to standards being measured or outcomes being measured?
A lot of the times when I develop the rubric, I have the standards right next to me, and I'm using for the top level score or criteria, I'm using the actual language from the standard to make sure that the rubric that I'm producing is aligned to the standards. And then that's what that exemplar would look like. And I will even use the criteria from the grade below or even the grade above to show what sort of a really like 5+ would look like versus like what maybe like a 3 or a 2 would look like, to kind of capture what a developing paper would look like, kind of not quite at proficient, but still using some of those terms and words from, in my case, the 5th grade standards or the 4th grade standards to sort of capture where they are on the overall vertical learning progression.
What about you, Mary?
I'm the same way. You've got to have the standards right there with it to be able to create what is it going to measure? What do the students have to be able to do?
Yeah, I like how I heard that both of you talked about this level of unpacking of standards. And again, it's not just unpacking to know what the standard says, but unpacking it in a way that we're getting this sort of progression of learning. So I think the strategies that you suggested is really helpful in trying to understand what comes before, where it is now, and where the student is going next. I like that.
Now, so yeah, because the alternative, something that's tempting, I think, is to have the rubric talk about the task itself, like the steps they're supposed to do, like if they're doing a PSA or something, like the elements you want in the video, which aren't really the standards. Do you have any advice then to how to make sure kids are still doing the task and doing some of the stuff that allow them to be successful, but isn't really what you're measuring?
I think it really goes back to being standard centric.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen rubrics where we're giving 10 points for color.
Yeah.
It's not a curriculum alignment. Great. It looks colorful. It's perfect. But really being centered in the standard and measuring what the kids have to do.
And I think a lot of that sort of process driven work can be guaranteed by a great graphic organizer, right? Great plan, a great lesson progression, sort of and that's what's great about the expeditionary learning curriculum is that there's always a graphic organizer for the essay or for the paragraph. So if we use those with fidelity, or if we develop them when we feel like they're lacking, then we find that the students have all the components that we want them to have, and we can just focus on those standards for grading.
I like that, shifting to some other resource, graphic organizer. It could be a checklist for kids to follow, but the rubric itself being grounded in the standards. It's wonderful.
And in the learning, right? What demonstration of learning.
So, Erin, I hear you talk about, matching the evidence. What is it that you want the students to the work to look like? And I'm assuming with your years of experience, you have quite a lot of things that you have collected to show students like, this is what the real deal should look like. So my question to you, once you have decided what you're putting in the rubric, what evidence you need to collect, what is your process of implementing that rubric?
So I think we always develop the rubric before we even launch any lessons for the unit. So we put that together ahead of time. We make sure that we have lessons that are planned for every single aspect of what's going to be expected on that rubric. We share the rubric with the students. One of the great things about expeditionary learning is that it has exemplar texts embedded in it. And so we're always looking at the exemplar text. The students have a good model. We do have past student work that we can show the students as well, and that's really powerful. But I think it's really important for students to understand, even before they start creating the work, what the work needs to look like. And so they need to see models, and they need to see that rubric ahead of time. And we talk about the rubric constantly. We look at the rubric constantly. Students peer edit using the same rubric. We do a more simplified version with emojis, where they might just drag an emoji with a smiley face if the student is good, or a face if they're kind of there, or a frowny face if they need some work. But again, they're working with that rubric. So the rubric isn't a mystery to the students. The requirements for the assignment aren't a mystery for the students. So that when they've been through that peer editing process and they turn in their work, it's usually of pretty high quality. And then I grade the work according to the rubric, often with my team, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we hand it back. And I actually go through the rubric with the students. We set aside time in class to look at the rubric and make sure we understand how we scored. We explicitly teach how to read a rubric. Sixth graders are not super familiar with that. So the rubric is kind of present with us through every lesson that we teach in a unit leading up to a performance task.
And I have to agree, we do the same thing, just refreshing them on how to read the rubric and how to figure out where they are, almost how they can calibrate themselves, and doing some of that peer editing with scoring with one another.
I think I like that idea that you guys are talking about, where there is a shift of seeing the rubric when you're on the lower end of the rubric, where, man, I just didn't do well, and you taking it personally, as opposed to being able to use the rubric to see, well, this is a demonstration of where I am in my understanding now, and I'm just not there yet, but I can still move forward and keep growing towards mastery. So I think I like those strategies that you all talked about.
And thank you for that too, Erin. You said the rubric is not a mystery. So this is not like, an evaluative piece of it. You're giving the students a chance to peer edit and look over the rubric with, the work that they're producing with their peers. So it's no mystery to the students. They know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And you have taught them through it. You have explained things to them. And I'm sure, you give them the opportunity to say, is this what you're looking for? That conversational piece with them, like, this is what I'm looking for in your work.
Yeah, I feel like throughout this series, the through line is just how to make rubrics a resource for students as opposed to just a grading mechanism for teachers. And I'm hearing a lot of really intentional, explicit strategies from y'all to make sure that it is useful for kids. So that's wonderful to hear.
And I think it ties in well when we talked about, I think in the previous season, assessment for learning. These are the ways that you can have an assessment for learning. So I'm liking that we're hearing more of this.
It builds the learner agency and their metacognition where they can reflect on themselves.
I like the analytical rubric because it does give a really precise idea at each point value, or at each level of mastery, what I'm seeing. It's descriptive, right? So it's saying, I saw that you were doing this, but if you want to do better, all you need to do is look to the right and see what will take you one step up or even further one step up. I haven't used a 1-point rubric, but I'm very intrigued by them. And I would like to try to roll that out this year because I think anything that gives students really precise feedback, a set of really precise steps that can be followed to improve their work that they're willing to engage with, I think is really powerful. It's where a checklist doesn't work. They don't know why they got a 7 out of 10. They don't know why they got a 4 out of 10. They don't know how to improve. So I think the thing about a rubric is they can always look to the right and see what do I need to do better on this as a retake? What do I need to do better next time? And from what I hear, Mary, I know you're using it. The 1-point rubric is very personalized, right? You're writing comments directly to the student. And I think those comments or that descriptive feedback is the most important part of the rubric because it's really, it is about grading, but for me, it's also about helping kids push their writing forward or push their work forward.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of WestEd has a good article we can drop in the show notes. Talks about that sometimes rubrics end up being deficit based, where it just points out all the ways in which kids might miss the mark. But I'm hearing from y'all ways in which it can be kind of asset mindset, where looking over you can tell them a progression and what to do next. And that's powerful because if all you're getting is just number 72, that doesn't tell you what you need to do in order to improve. But y'all are giving a lot of good ideas for how to improve upon that.
And I think it also helps us as from a student point of view. Again, that sort of like it's a 7-2 and it's a done deal, as opposed to there is movement, there is growth. It's not a fixed mindset, but again, helping students attain more of a growth mindset that you can keep moving, you can keep attaining more and showing more.
Yeah, and I think that's another value in y'all talking about students getting the rubric early. So it's not just they don't just see it when it's already done, but they can get on it and it can be after the first draft of the essay or the performance task or something. Say like, okay, I'm here. Either feedback from you or what you guys are saying from peers or themselves. Be like, well, I want to shift over here, and it tells them exactly how to do so. So that's powerful.
Yeah, and there's that value of that checkpoint halfway through, like you said, with a rough draft, or with once they get it back, that mastery mindset, that growth mindset of, well, let me go back and look at how I do this better for next time.
Right.
I think I've started to think about performance tasks more as sort of like, this isn't the end. It's kind of a starting point. And I'm trying to get the students to see that as well. You turn something in, I gave you feedback. And at my school, we're very much like about retesting, redoing, improving your grade. And so, like you could make this the end if you wanted to,
right.
But you could also improve, refine, even change one thing and turn it back in. You did important work to grow as a writer and as a student. So trying to kind of work the students around to that mindset as well. Like this rubric is a starting point, but you can make it the end if you want, but you could also move yourself over.
Yeah, that makes me think like a performance task or a lot of the assignments that we might be using a rubric with, they oftentimes can be somewhat broad. And the wonderful thing is students can take them anywhere, but we want to always kind of channel them into what are the standards asking for? What are we trying to measure? And it makes me think about how Susan Brookhart, who we interviewed in the last episode, says that rubrics give structure to observation. So it helps us to kind of focus on what to observe and how to describe it. So how have y'all found rubrics to help observe and describe student work?
It's made me a much more efficient grader, right? I'm not sitting and agonizing over a point here or a point there. I'm not distracted by their spelling if that's not something that's on the rubric. It's made me a much more efficient grader. It's made it a lot less angsty for me because I've already clearly laid out, what each level is going to look like. And so all I have to do really is kind of match what I'm observing on the paper with this criteria that I've set up. So for me, it's been amazing. To try to grade without a rubric is really disorienting, and it's extremely difficult to be consistent. And I have a lot of anxiety about it. So I'm to the point where I'll even make a rubric for a set of short answer questions, just so I can describe what each response is going to look like. It's just much faster for me and more efficient for me to grade that way.
And I thought I also heard you talk about you use previous student work or examples or exemplars to kind of show the different levels of performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that. One of my opening activities is with students, a calibration set where I give them 4 body paragraph samples and they go through and they grade it on a holistic. Would this be a 1, 2, 3, or 4? And then we talk about why. So they get that kind of practice to think, okay, this is what I've got to have.
And that's a little different than pure editing, because I think if it's past student work or it's work that doesn't have a name on it, they'll be more honest and more incisive, and they love it. I don't know about you, Mary, but my kids love applying the rubric to work that's not theirs or not their direct peers. And that's a really powerful and pretty fun activity, honestly, to have them grade exemplar work.
Yeah, I was reading research a while ago that talked about that the real value in peer feedback isn't necessarily receiving it, but the giving peer feedback, because that forces you to really think closely about what are the learning targets and those kind of things. So giving peer feedback is more beneficial than actually receiving it oftentimes.
I like that you talk about the consistency in how you're grading students' work. So you're saying you basically can't do anything without it right now because it puts that fair eye to what mastery is supposed to be, right? So definitely, I was listening for that word consistency, and you brought it up, that your rubric helps you to be consistent. Thank you for that.
And it helps my PLT be consistent as well, honestly. So at my school, there's not a terrific amount of variance between what one 6th grade ELA teacher assigns as a grade versus another, because we're all using the same rubric. And we've written it in such a way that we will give a very similar grade to the same essay, 1 or 2 points off, maybe,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see how rubrics can help with that inter-rater reliability. I also think about how it probably would have helped me with the intra-rater reliability, so that I'm not so swayed by, am I exhausted because it's at the end of the day as opposed to another? Is my first essay that I'm scoring and giving feedback on, is that going to be consistent with the 20th? The strong rubric will really help to anchor that.
And I think inadvertently we're kind of talking about rubrics being things that are not static, that you can build a rubric, work with it in your PLC, work with it with your students, grade it, and still tweak it and keep refining it and improving it. So again, it of itself is not this sort of static sort of thing. It can change as well.
Very much a living document, like for high school, semester by semester even.
Yeah, I'm when you said that living document, it's like semester to semester, you're actually monitoring the students' work by using that rubric, because you can see what they did last term. And then if you're giving a similar assignment, you can look back and see what did they produce in that first semester versus what I'm getting now. So the rubric definitely can help you to monitor the students' learning process.
And even monitor how I teach. Maybe I didn't do something or progress the learning the same way.
Good tool for revising our lesson plans, right?
Whenever we talk about an assessment that's coming up, I feel like the first thing we always do is relook at the prompt. We've been teaching this for 6 years now, relook at the prompt and then double check the rubric and see if it's still what we want it to be. And a lot of times we'll adjust point values because something was weighted a little too hard or too easy, or sometimes we'll change, the criteria or the descriptors. So it is really something that it's part of our process to revisit every time we give an assessment.
I like that.
Do you find, for example, you give a task last year, the curriculum hasn't changed, you're using back the same task this year, but then the quality of the student work has improved? What do you do first? Do you go and revise the the acts of the task, or do you revise your rubric first?
I feel like because we have standardized assessments through the expeditionary learning curriculum, I feel like we would probably in that situation tweak the rubric, right? The task always has to kind of be the same or centered on the same standards, but I think we would adjust sort of what a 5-point looks like relative to a 4-point, relative to a 3-point to reflect student mastery, because they're just not just struggling as much. We want to challenge them and push them forward a little bit.
And I can see value in kind of doing both. Where kids are coming in with stronger use of topic sentences or stronger use of textual evidence, then maybe change that where there's a different level of expectation with it. And then revising, again, like Aaron just said, the levels that 4, the 5.
And that might be a good spot for a single point rubric, since that's leaning more into the descriptive feedback, where you can always find kids where they are and give them a little bit more room to kind of push instead of trying to figure out which column they fall into.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just brought up something, Spencer. I know one assignment where I've got a single point for part like 1 and 2, and then I've got analytical for part 3 using
Interesting.
So that's good to know that, again, you're using the rubrics to suit your purpose, not your purpose.
Yeah.
You're trying to force fit it into a rubric, which I think sometimes we can get ourselves into. We have a rubric and we're trying to make it fit, as opposed to making the rubric work for the instructional purposes of our classroom. So thank you so much, Mary and Aaron, for all that you have shared with us today. Yeah. I think, I have learned so much, as I know I would, because again, the expertise is with our teachers in the classroom. As always, if you have questions, comments, or further notes, you can always reach us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. Thank you to Maya Smith from Enloe High School for the music. And until next time, bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.